She was just a waitress, and she managed what the greatest experts in London could not: get the autistic son of a British tycoon to eat a traditional dish, a shepherd's pie. It seems unlikely, doesn't it? But what happened in that London mansion behind silent doors forever changed the lives of a powerful man who had everything, of a boy lost in his own world, and of a woman who possessed a wisdom that money cannot buy. Please watch the full video to understand this exciting journey. And of course, before continuing, subscribe to the channel, like it, and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Dining room of William Ashford's mansion in Knightsbridge, London, was a place where time seemed to have stood still. The walls, lined with dark oak panels that had witnessed generations of dinners formal, absorbed the gray light that entered through the Georgian windows, making the room gloomy despite the crystal chandelier that hung, unlit, over the table. The air was loaded with the heavy silence that follows a lost battle. In the center of the mahogany table, long enough to seat 20 guests, a single porcelain plate contained the epicenter of defeat: a shepherd's pie. The mashed potato crust, which should have been golden and inviting, was pale and untouched. The rich smell of meat and vegetables, an aroma that should have evoked comfort and home, now mingled with the fragrance cold of disappointment, becoming a perfume of failure. To the man standing by the marble fireplace, that pie was too much more than food. It was the most recent monument to their complete and total impotence. William Ashford was a name that resonated with power in the corridors of the City of London. One titan of finance, whose sharp mind and ruthless instincts could orchestrate mergers multi-billion-dollar and overthrow corporate empires. He wore a suit made bespoke in Savile Row that cost the same as a popular car, and its watch was a masterpiece of engineering Switzerland. But there, in that room in front of that dish, he was not a tycoon. He was just a father, stripped of all his armor of success, confronted by the one negotiation he could win, the only heart he could reach. Your frustration was a physical pain, a tightness in his chest that made breathing shallow. He had exhausted all its options, mobilized its entire vast network of contacts to bring the best experts that money could buy, and each of them had out of that same room, defeated by the silence of his 5-year-old son. Oliver, the cause and center of that anguish, was sitting on the floor in a far corner of the room. I wasn't even crying, throwing a tantrum. He was in his own world, a constructed universe with rules and logic that no one more seemed to understand. His little fingers were busy aligning the threads, individual pieces of the fringe of a Persian rug, creating an order perfect from chaos. Their eyes, a deep blue like his father's, were focused in that task with one intensity that shut out everything else. The aroma of shepherd's pie, the imposing presence of his father, the weight of expectation in the room, none of it seemed to penetrate the bubble of concentration that surrounded him. Oliver did not. He was being disobedient. He was surviving, managing a world that for him was a cacophony of sensory stimuli overwhelming. And that wire alignment was your anchor, your safe haven. The list of experts who had tried and failed was long and illustrious. Renowned pediatric nutritionist who spoke about flavor profiles and aversions, textural, occupational therapists who brought cutlery with different weights and dishes of various colors, Harley Street child psychologists who tried using play therapy by turning food into planes and trains. Each had arrived with credentials impeccable and left with one complex report, a substantial invoice and the same veiled conclusion: the problem was intractable. They saw Oliver as a puzzle to be solved, a set of behaviors to be modified. They could see the boy behind the diagnosis, the scared little soul who simply could to lead with the unpredictability of a forkful of mixed food, where the puree soft found the grainy texture of the meat and the surprise of a pea or carrot. He was in that scene of silent surrender as the dining room door opened. No with the confidence of an expert or the formality of a butler, but with one gentle hesitation. Who entered was Amelia Clark. She was young, perhaps in her early 20 years old, and wore the simple, functional uniform of a waitress from a nearby cafe: a white shirt, trousers black, and one apron. She had been called in an act of sheer desperation. The manager of the cafe, which provided meals for the mansion, had heard of William's struggle and had mentioned, without warning, many conviction, that one of his waitresses, Amelia, had one brother more new with needs similar and seemed to have a gift for calming him down. It was a shot in the dark, a gamble so unlikely that William only accepted her because he didn't. There was nothing more to lose. Amelia stopped just inside the door, her eyes absorbing the scene with a silent swiftness. She no looked first to the tycoon in the expensive suit or to the opulence of the room. His gaze, he was immediately to the boy in the corner. She saw the intense concentration, the way his shoulders were curved inward, creating a shield against the world. She saw the repetitive, rhythmic movement of his fingers in the threads of the carpet. And in everything this, she knew it saw one disorder or a problem. It saw your brother, Leo. He saw the same strategies, the same search for order in a chaotic world. A wave of empathy so familiar and powerful ran through him. Your body, in that rich boy in a London mansion. She recognized the same silent language of his brother in his small flat in Brixton. William turned, his eyes weary and skeptical. He looked Amelia up and down in a second. He saw the youth, the cheap uniform, the lack of any equipment or credential. A pang of irritation and regret hit him. What was he thinking? After having the best brains of the country in their payroll, now was placing his last drop of hope in a waitress. The situation was ridiculous, humiliating. He was about to dismiss her with a dry gesture and a polite apology, but something made him hesitate. There was a calm in her, a stillness in his posture that contrasted strongly with anxiety, confident of the experts. She seemed intimidated by the room, not even by him. She just seemed present. Amelia did not address William, nor looked at the food on the table. She knew by instinct and from years of experience practice that adult anxiety was a poison in the air for a child like Oliver. The desperate energy of a father wanting to fix his son was a noise deafening. Instead, her focus remained on the boy. She began to move, not towards him, but along the wall of the room with slow, silent steps. His movements were deliberate and gentle, designed not to be one intrusion, but one gradual addition to the sensory landscape of the environment. It was introducing himself not as a person, but as a calm presence, a new and not threatening in the ecosystem of the room. She no searched one chair or a couch. Instead, she did something that took William completely by surprise. She sat on the floor, not cross-legged in a childish way, but in a functional way, with the knees bent to the side. He chose a place to one distance considerable of Oliver, perhaps 4 or 5 meters, and not directly into your line of sight, but in a side angle. It was a posture of submission, a declaration non-verbal that she knew he was there to take control. He was there to share the same level, the same plane of existence. For William, accustomed to presiding over meetings in imposing boardrooms, that act of sitting on the floor of his own dining room he was more shocking and significant than any PowerPoint presentation he had already seen. For several minutes that stretched out like an eternity, Amelia did nothing but breathe. She focused on making her breathing slow, deep and audible enough to be a rhythmic, soothing sound in the tense silence. She looked directly to Oliver. Instead, he left your gaze wander gently around the room, observing the pattern of light on the floor, the texture of the wood, the books on the shelf. She was tuning into the environment, allowing Oliver to get used to it with your presence in their own terms. She knew that any attempt to force one interaction, it would be like trying to catch a fish with his hands. The sudden movement would only frighten him into the depths. Patience was his tool, most importantly, a patience forged not in seminars, but in long, silent afternoons with Leo. His mind traveled for a moment to the living room of his apartment. He remembered Leo, at 6 years old, lying on the floor, watching the dust particles dancing in a ray of sunshine for over an hour. He remembered how he learned not to interrupt, not to ask, "What are you doing?" He learned that his silence shared was a form of communion, a way of saying, "I see what you see, and it's all well." She learned to recognize the subtle difference in tension of their shoulders, an indicator that he was calm or approaching sensory overload. These memories were just memories. They were your instruction manual, your library of empirical knowledge. It was applying a technique, was simply being the sister that always outside. William, for his part, felt like a spectator in his own home. The dynamics of the room had changed with Amelia's arrival. He, the man who was always at the center of everything, was now a peripheral figure, observing a silent play unfolding on the floor. He found himself holding my breath, afraid that the slightest noise could break the delicate thread Amelia seemed to be weaving in the air. He compared her approach with that of the others. The experts were arriving with agendas, plans, and an aura of authority. They saw Oliver as a code to be deciphered. Amelia, however, seemed to see an ecosystem to be understood. Idno was trying to change Oliver. He was trying to understand the conditions of his world. Finally, after a long period of acclimatizing silence, Amelia did your first deliberate movement, but not went towards Oliver, not towards the table. She took something out of her apron pocket. It wasn't a toy flashy or one-tool therapeutic. It was a simple teaspoon from the cafe where she worked. She held it in the palm of your hand, looking at it as if it were the most object interesting in the world. She turned her over, feeling the cold metal on her skin, watching as the dull light of the room reflected off her curved surface. He was introducing one new object in the environment, but an associated object to the act of eating, stripping it of its function immediately and transforming it into an item of sensory curiosity. Oliver, who until then seemed completely immersed in his task with the carpet, registered the new stimulus. No, he was one movement obvious. It was the briefest of pauses in his rhythmic movements. His fingers stopped for a fraction of a second before resuming the alignment of the threads. It was one tiny signal, a blip on the radar, but to Amelia, who was tuned into that frequency, was one clear sign. He noticed. He registered the spoon. The first bridge, fragile and thin as a spider's web, had been thrown across the abyss. Amelia didn't react it externally. No smiled. No made no sound. She just filed the information. The connection there was started. With the spoon in the hand, Amelia began to beat on it gently with his index fingernail. The sound was a tiny, metallic, and crucially rhythmic ting, 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 ting. It was a pure sound, without emotional baggage or social demand. She looked at the spoon while produced the sound, its completely focused attention in that simple act. She was presenting itself to the child. It was creating a point of sensory interest, an auditory event that existed in its own right, inviting observation without requiring participation. The small metallic melody filled a part of the silence in the room, replacing the tension with a methodical and predictable pulse. William watched the scene, torn between skepticism and growing astonishment. He had bought toys musicals dearest, therapeutic instruments designed for auditory stimulation. None of them had captured Oliver's attention. And now this young woman, with one teaspoon stolen and the tip of the nail, seemed to be achieving what an orchestra of experts could not got. The interest volunteer of your son. He could see. Oliver's head, though yet low, was subtly inclined in the direction of the sound. The movements of his fingers on the carpet had become slower, less absorbed. He was listening. An emotion that William hardly dared to name, a small seed of hope, began to germinate in his chest, exhausted. Amelia kept up the rhythmic beat for maybe a minute, building a hearing safety base. It was a sound that Oliver could trust. So, she changed subtly. Instead of hitting on the back of the spoon, it started to beat on the edge. Ting, ting, ting. The tone was slightly higher, the rhythm one little faster. It was a small variation in the pattern, a gentle test to see if he would follow it in this little journey of sound exploration. To William, they were just noises, meaningless. To Amelia, it was a dialogue. He was saying, I am safe, I am predictable, and now, something has changed. One little, you is still safe with me. He was building trust, one ting at a time, and then the first silent miracle happened. Oliver stopped fiddling with the carpet, completely. His fingers went motionless on the colored threads. Slowly, with one hesitation that seemed to contain years of isolation, he raised his head, his large eyes blues, previously focused on the microcosm at their feet. Now they were directed to the other side of the room. They don't focused on Amelia, no still. They focused on the object that produced that one sound interesting and safe. They focused in the teaspoon in her hand. For the first time that day, perhaps that week, Oliver's gaze voluntarily connected with an object presented by another person. The island was finally spotting a ship on the horizon. Amelia felt the weight of that look, but resisted instinct to meet Oliver's eyes. That would be a confrontation, an escalation too quickly. Instead, she kept your focus on spoon, as if she as the spoon were in a private conversation. She continued the rhythm for a few seconds, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was different. It didn't. He was more empty or tense, was full of expectation. With one slow and deliberate movement, She placed the teaspoon on the polished wooden floor, halfway path between her and Oliver, and then she waited. The invitation was done. The choice was entirely his. What happened next made William Ashford's heart stop and then race. After a moment of apparent indecision, Oliver began to move. He crawled across the floor, his small body moving with a purpose that was shocking to behold. He did not went to Amelia. He went to the spoon. His little fingers reached out and touched the cold metal. He picked it up. It felt its weight, its shape. So, with the spoon in the hand, he looked at her, and then, for the first time, he looked directly to Amelia. Their eyes met for a second. No, there was demand in his gaze, just curiosity. And then, imitating what she there was done, he hit with the nail in the spoon. Ting. A single sound. A answer. There was a conversation started. The only ting from Oliver's spoon was one response that resonated in the vast dining room with the strength of a thunder. For William, it was more significant than any word that your son could have said. It was a participation, a recognition, an acceptance of Amelia's presence in his world. He saw Amelia's lips curve into the tiniest, most discreet of smiles, a recognition that was only for her. She no praised, no clapped her hands. She simply accepted his answer and responded in turn. He picked up the spoon from the floor, and instead of hitting it in it, he slid it smoothly across the polished wooden floor, making it spin. The spoon danced for a moment before stopping near Oliver. It was a new game, a new question. And now, what you will do with that? Oliver watched the spoon rotating with fascination. The way the light caught the moving metal was a new kind of stimulus, predictable but captivating. He picked up the spoon and, with one intense concentration, tried to imitate the movement. His first attempt was clumsy, and the spoon simply slid straight. He tried again, adjusting the angle of his wrist. In third attempt, the spoon spun, a brief moment of rotation that was entirely your own creation. He does not smiled, but the tension in his small shoulders decreased visibly. He was learning a new language, a language of physics, sound, and motion, and Amelia was its fluent and patient conversation partner. They continued that silent game of sliding and turning for several minutes, building a rhythm, a basis of interaction shared. William felt a warm and lonely tear escape and trace one path across his face. He didn't wipe it. It was transfixed by the scene. He had paid a fortune for therapies that focused on relay skills and joint engagement, using charts and reward systems. Amelia was teaching the same concepts, but in an organic way, without labels or agendas. She knew he was teaching one skill. She was fostering a relationship. He realized the fundamental flaw in all previous approaches. They tried pull Oliver into their world, a noisy, unpredictable, and scary world. Amelia, with one wisdom that seemed old, was simply creating a safe space in his world and waiting for him to invite her in. In that silent ballet of spoons on the floor, trust he was being woven, thread by thread. Oliver was learning that Amelia's presence meant safety, predictability, and sensory stimuli interesting, but not overwhelming. Amelia was learning the rhythms of Oliver, his attention span, your small frustrations and their silent victories. She validated his every effort with your calm, continuous attention, the most powerful form of positive reinforcement he could receive. The teaspoon had become the artifact of his connection, an object that transcended the barrier between its two distinct worlds. Now one territory shared on the floor from that cold, Oboyan formal dining room. And then, at the height of this connection established, Amelia made the transition. It was one movement so subtle and natural that it almost seemed accidental. While Oliver was focused on spinning the spoon, Amelia's gaze slowly and deliberately shifted to the dinner table. She no pointed, no spoke. He just stared. His focus moved from the game on the floor to the plate of shepherd's pie. Oliver, whose attention now was tuned to hers like a finely tuned instrument, followed your look. For the first time, he looked at the plate not as a threat, not as a requirement, but as something that had captured the interest of its new and safe interaction partner. Food was recontextualized. It stopped being the enemy and became just more an object in the environment. With the slowness of a deer approaching a stream, Amelia began to stand up. The movement, no, was abrupt. She leaned on in the hands, then on the knees, unfolding with one fluid grace. She maintained eye contact with Oliver for a moment, offering a slight nod, a silent request for permission to pause the game. The boy watched her, the spoon held in his hand. Hand, your body perfectly property. He does not retreated. The confidence she there was built was his anchor in the storm of anxiety that would normally assail him. She approached the table, ignoring the vast, complex landscape of the pie. Her target was specific, chosen with the care of a strategist. The mashed potato crust. She used one fork, used the fork itself, teaspoon with which were playing, the object of their trust. He picked up one tiny portion of the surface of the puree, perhaps the size of a peas. Just the puree, without sauce, without meat, without surprises. A single texture, a single color. She brought it back to its place on the floor, moving with the same calm and purpose as before. She sat down and placed the spoon with the little one white cloud of potato on the ground, next to where the game was happening. Food had entered their safe space, but it had entered in a gentle, domesticated way, and most importantly, on a manageable scale. Amelia offered the spoon to Oliver. Instead, she dipped the tip of her index finger into the small mound of puree. She rubbed it between her thumb and forefinger, feeling the soft, slightly sticky texture. She was modeling sensory exploration. I was showing him that new object could be touched, investigated, understood with the senses before it was considered food. It was removing the pressure of eating and replacing it with permission to play. William watched, his heart in his throat. He had seen Oliver go into crying fits just from having some mashed potatoes accidentally on your hand. What Amelia was doing seemed impossible. One violation of all rules known to Oliver's world. He put his finger close to his nose and smelled the puree, with one expression of neutral curiosity. I was rewriting the script associated with food. It wasn't about, eat this. It was about, what is this? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? What is the temperature? It was transforming an anxiety trigger in a science experiment, and she and Oliver were the only two scientists in the lab. She put the spoon back on the floor and wiped her finger on her apron. The demonstration was complete. The invitation, once upon a time, it was silent and without pressure. The small portion of mashed potatoes was there, one new toy waiting to be explored. Oliver, who had watched every movement with one hypnotic attention, hesitated for a long moment. He looked at the puree and the spoon, then to Amelia, and back to the puree. The gears in her brain were spinning, processing the new information, weighing the risk against curiosity. The confidence Amelia had built was at war with years of instinctive aversion. So, with a slowness that was painful to watch, he reached out. His fingers hovered over the puree for a second, and then he touched it. Just a light touch, with the tip of his index finger. He felt the softness, the warmth, and not stepped back. He kept his finger there, feeling the texture, processing the information tactile without panic. For William, that touch was an earthquake. It was one victory so monumental that he had to hold on to the back of a chair to steady herself. The tears now ran freely by his face, but he did sound. Was witnessing the breaking of a barrier he believed to be impenetrable. He saw Amelia remain perfectly motionless, his calm the anchor that allowed Oliver the courage to explore. Any exclamation of joy, any sudden movement, and the spell would be broken. Her discipline was so impressive as your intuition. She knew that moment wasn't about her. It was entirely about Oliver and his inch-long journey through a minefield of fear. Oliver pulled his finger away and looked at the small white mark on his skin. He then looked at Amelia, a look that seemed to ask, "What now?" Amelia replied to the look at him with one slow and deliberate movement. He picked up one little more puree in your own finger, and instead of smelling it, she touched it to her own lower lip for an instant, and then cleaned. More once. One demonstration. Not eating, just touching. It was a gradual progression. A ladder with steps very small and safe, allowing Oliver to climb into his own rhythm. He was giving you a map to this new territory, showing you the way step by step. The boy observed, processed. He looked at the puree in his own finger. With one courage that seemed coming from a deep and newly discovered place, he raised his hand toward to the face. The movement was hesitant, stopping and starting, but he continued. He put his finger to his lips and touched the puree to them. He felt the soft texture and warmth in a place he had always outside associated with the anguish of eating. Their eyes widened slightly. not out of fear, but out of surprise, and he did not move away with disgust. He simply recorded the new sensation. The food had arrived to the gate of the fortress, and the sentry, no, there was the alarm sounded. Then it happened. The moment that would change everything. Perhaps by accident, perhaps out of curiosity, Oliver licked the tip of his finger. Just a little lick. The mild, salty flavor of the mashed potatoes touched your language. Your expression has transformed. It was a mixture of shock, surprise, and, most of all, amazing of all, an absence of panic. He does not spat. He didn't choked. He didn't screamed. He swallowed. And then he looked at the spoon on the floor, where it still there was one little bit of puree. Slowly he picked up the spoon, scooped up the rest of the puree, and with hesitant determination, he took the spoon to his mouth and ate. William Ashford's dam of self-control had completely broken. A hiccup escaped from his throat. A harsh, guttural sound tore through the silence of the room. He doubled over, resting his hands on his knees, his body shaking with the force of years of frustration, fear, and pain, being released from only once. Her son, her precious, unattainable Oliver, was eating, voluntarily. And he was eating because of a young waitress who had the wisdom not to him offer one plate of food, but of him offer an invitation to play. Simplicity and depth of that, they were overwhelming. Amelia heard William's sob, but didn't deviate your Oliver's attention. The boy, having completed his act of bravery, now looked at her, perhaps expecting a reaction. Amelia offered him one soft and genuine smile, and then she blinked slowly, a single slow blink. It was their sign of approval, a gesture she used with your brother Leo to say, "I saw you, and what did you? He was great," without using words that might shatter the moment. Oliver seemed to understand. He put the spoon down empty on the floor and returned your pay attention to the carpet threads, their secure anchor. But something had changed. He had ventured out of its harbor and discovered that the ocean, it wasn't so scary as he thought. That single mouthful of mashed potatoes was more than nutrition. It was a crossed border. It was a proof of concept. It proved that with confidence, patience, and the approach correct, change was possible. It proved that the barrier around Oliver was not made of steel, but of fear, and fear could be gently dismantled. Amelia knew the journey was long. He did not. I would eat the whole shepherd's pie in that day, nor perhaps the following week. But the door, previously locked and barricaded, was now half open, and a half-open door was all she had needed. As William tried to compose himself, wiping his face with one linen handkerchief, his sharp financier's mind set to work, but in a different direction. He was analyzing markets or actions, was analyzing what she had just witnessed. The value of it was incalculable. Amelia's skill was not something that could be learned in a course or certified with a diploma. It was a gift of empathy, patience, and deep intuitive understanding. It was the asset more valuable than he already had found, not for their business, but for the only thing that really mattered, his son. One decision formed in his mind, clear and absolute. He did not could to leave that one young to go out of that room and go back to serving coffee. It would be a criminal waste of his talent. It would be an abandonment of the first glimmer of hope he had seen in years. An offer began to take shape in his mind. One proposal that would change her life so much drastically as she had changed his son in the last 30 minutes. He didn't. I was just thinking of offering one job. I was thinking about investing in person who held the key to the future of their family. He finally straightened up, his face still streaked with tears, but his eyes shining with a new, fierce determination. He looked at Amelia, who was sitting calmly on the floor, watching Oliver with one serenity that was almost otherworldly. He opened his mouth to speak, his usual commanding voice now replaced by a tone of reverence and urgency. The crucial moment of the meal there was past, but one new, equally decisive moment was about to begin. The fate of 3 people lonely was about to collide and merge, all because of 1 teaspoon, a dollop of mashed potatoes, and the extraordinary stillness of a young man who knew how to listen to the silence. Ashford's voice, when it finally cut through the silence, was almost unrecognizable. Authority and impatience had disappeared, replaced by a tone of reverence and a vulnerability raw. "Please," he began, the words leaving with difficulty, as if they were foreign words in his mouth. "Don't go. He stepped closer, not intimidatingly, but with the hesitation of someone approaching something sacred and fragile. I know how he did this. I understand. But I saw, for years, the most expensive experts in the world gave me theories, diagnoses, and excuses. They told me what was wrong with my son. You, in less than an hour, showed me what is right. With him, you showed me that he is in there waiting for someone who speaks his language. He stopped in front of her, the tycoon who ran the boardrooms now looking like a supplicant. This is not a waitress job. What do you has is a gift, an art form, a science that nobody but seems to know. I want you to work for me, for Oliver, not as a nanny, not as a housekeeper, as your development partner, your therapeutic consultant. He took a deep breath, the offer forming with the urgency of an epiphany. I will pay whatever it takes, one salary that will free her from any concern financially for the rest of my life. And more than that, I will pay for your education, child psychology, occupational therapy. What do he want study? In better university in the world. I will finance everything. Just help my son. Teach me to understand him as you understand him. William's words fell upon Amelia like an avalanche. Salary, university, a new life. It was the escape she dreamed silently during long shifts at the cafe, the fantasy that kept her on her feet when tiredness threatened to bring her down. It was the chance to transform her life experience in a profession, to help others' children like Leo and Oliver. It was a fairy tale, a golden door opening where before there had been only a brick wall. But instead of a wave of joy, what flooded her he was one panic cold, an instinctive deep fear, fed by the scars of disappointments past. The world of men like William Ashford was a world that she had learned to fear. Her mind took her back to 3 years earlier. Owner of an art gallery, a man charming and rich who saw the drawings of his brother Leo and promised the world. He promised one exposure, promised guidance, promised that Leo's talent would be recognized. His family believed, Leo believed, and for a few months they lived in this hope, until man simply stopped answering calls. He used Leo's story for his own marketing, to look like a philanthropist, and then discarded him when lost interest. The lesson, it was brutal. For the rich and powerful, people like you family were, many times, just projects passengers, accessories for their own narratives. She looked at William, at his expensive suit, at the room that was worth more than anything your family already had possessed, and she saw the same pattern, the same danger. What would happen when the news passed? What would happen when Oliver had one day bad, a week of regression, and she could produce more miracles? She would be dismissed like the experts before her. A experience failed. The gratitude of a desperate father was a volatile emotion, a base of sand shifting to build a future. The offer was a dream, but awakening could be a nightmare that I didn't know if I could handle it again. William, with the perception sharp of whom read people to make a living, saw her hesitation, the fear that replaced the calm in her eyes. He saw the distrust raise one wall between them, and instead of using their power to persuade or his wealth to press, he did the only thing that could, at that moment, make a difference. He disarmed himself. He looked at the ornate mahogany chair and ignored it. Instead, he knelt on the floor, not awkwardly, but with one deliberate slowness, until your eyes were almost on the same level as hers, the act of a king kneeling in front of a commoner. "I understand why you trust me," he said, his voice now low, almost one whisper. "I live in a world built on distrust and advantage, but I ask you to look besides me. Look at him." His gaze turned to Oliver, who was again tracing the patterns of the carpet, safe in their world. People look at me and see power, see success, but what nobody sees is the loneliness. The silence in this house, it's deafening. I have one son, and for years I felt like we were strangers living under the same roof. The pain of loving him so much and not being able to reach him is a kind of bankruptcy that no balance financial can show. Honesty in your confession was a physical strength. You not only did my son eat, Amelia, you saw him. You heard him in his silence. In 30 minutes you gave him more dignity and respect for what I, with all my love and ignorance, have given over the years. My offering is not charity, it is selfishness. I need you because I am one failure in this. I admit it. I am asking your help because I can't do it that alone. I am him asking to teach me how to be the father Oliver deserves. The tycoon's armor had completely disintegrated, leaving only a man, a father, broken and begging for help. Words, and the act of kneeling, demolished Amelia's defenses. The pain in her voice was the same pain she saw in the eyes of his own mother. His frustration was the same as hers, felt when no could calm Leo. The wealth, the mansion, the suit, everything that disappeared. She had saw only the universality of fatherhood, love and fear. Empathy, its true compass, pointed firmly at direction of him. She realized that his fear, although valid, was about his past. This situation was about the future of another person, the future of a child, and it was Oliver who sealed the deal. As if he felt the change in the atmosphere, he stopped playing with the carpet, picked up the teaspoon empty, and crawled over to where Amelia was sitting. He didn't say nothing. He just put the spoon down in her hand. It was a gesture of absolute trust, an act of giving her the tool of her connection, as if to say, "Keep going. I'm ready for whatever comes next." It was confirmation that the bond they had formed was real and resilient. Amelia looked at the spoon in her hand, then to Oliver's expectant face, and then to William's pleading face, still kneeling on the floor. At that moment she understood. Refuse the offer because of the wounds of his past would be to punish the present. It would be to abandon that child at the exact moment she there was him taught to have courage. It would be to allow the disappointment of the past dictate the limits of hope for the future. And it no could to do this. Her purpose, that she always felt, but never knew how to articulate, was there, in that room, in the form of a boy, a father, and a teaspoon. She no said yes. The words seemed inadequate, small too much for the enormity of the moment. Instead, she looked directly to William, and in his to look there was a contract with clear terms. I will do this for him, not for you or by your money. And then, she turned to Oliver, gave him that same slow, secret blink, and picked up the spoon with the intention of going to get more some mashed potatoes. Your yes is not, he was one word. It was the continuation of an action. The relief that flooded William's face was so deep that it seemed wither and grow stronger at the same time. He remained on his knees for more a moment, a powerful man who had completely surrendered, and, at do it, there was one everything. He watched Amelia pick up one tiny portion of puree, and Oliver accepts it without hesitation. The transaction, most important thing in your life, is not. It had been signed in a boardroom, but sealed silently on the floor of his dining room. The dynamics of the room had been rewritten forever. No, they were more one employer, an employee and a problem child. They were three people in a fragile boat at the beginning of a long and uncertain trip. And for the first time, there was a navigator on board who understood the stars and the currents. William finally stood up, his knees hurting, but your heart light for the first time in years. He didn't feel more like a failure, but as a student in the first day of your education, most important. Amelia, no, I thought about the contract, the salary, or in the university. Your mind already, he was working, analyzing. The mashed potatoes were one victory. But what about the mixed textures, the meat, the vegetables? The journey was long. I knew there would be days of regression, of frustration, of silence. But now, there was a base. There was trust. There was one teaspoon that symbolized one alliance. She knew he was more just taking care of one child, was helping to rebuild a family, filling the silence of a home with the possibility of understanding. Later that night, very after Amelia left with the promise to return in the morning next, William entered Oliver's room. The boy was sleeping soundly, his expression serene. For the first time in a long time, he did not seem an unattainable fortress, but only your son. William sat on the edge of the bed and realized that Amelia was not him, had only fed Oliver. She had fed him too. Fed him one hope he doesn't even. I knew I was starving to feel. Their journey was just beginning, but the foundation had been launched in that polished wooden floor. A foundation built no with cement and steel, like William's buildings, but with patience, respect, and the radical wisdom of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Amelia doesn't. He had a diploma, but had one PhD in empathy, obtained through life experience with your brother, and that was the only qualification that really mattered. Outside world would see one Cinderella story, the humble waitress who had her life transformed by a wealthy tycoon, but they would be wrong. The real transformation wasn't hers. It was William and Oliver's. Amelia didn't. He was being rescued from her life. He was being invited to rescue them from theirs, from a prison of wealth and silence. She was Aunt the damsel in distress. She was the key to the lock that no one more could open. The grand mansion in Knightsbridge was still vast and echoing, but in that night, the silence was different. It was no longer the silence of emptiness and distance. It was a silence of expectation, of potential, the silence before the music began. It was the sound of a new possibility, the sound of a bridge being built over an abyss that once seemed insurmountable, and everything it started no with a business plan or one complex strategy, but with an act of simplicity revolutionary. It started with the courage of a young man to ignore the rules of the world and follow the rules of the human heart. He began with the wisdom to understand that, to achieve someone in your isolated world, you does not scream across the abyss. You silently descends to the bottom and begins to build a ladder, one step of confidence at a time. He wasn't looking for a savior. He just mourned the lost connection with his son, and it was with a plate of shepherd's pie and the calm wisdom of a waitress that the man who ruled an empire found the opportunity to rebuild his family. Sometimes we believe that solutions are in the most complex places, that power and money can move any mountain. But this story reminds us that life, like the sun breaking through the London fog, finds a way to shine where brute force sees no way, and that true human connection, even when tested by silence and pain, is the only force capable of healing the deepest wounds. If the story of William, Amelia, and little Oliver touched your heart, write "hope" in the comments. I promise to read each message with great care. And if you believe that empathy is the key that opens the most difficult doors, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our stories. Because sometimes the biggest transformation in a life doesn't start with a plan, but with a simple plate of food and the courage to sit on the floor and listen to the silence.